Is anyone else just super excited about the upcoming World Cup? At this point, we're well less than a year away from the best sporting spectacle in the world finally returning. I mean, who wouldn't be excited for massively overpriced tickets, logistical nightmares of trying to afford travel to potentially 3 different countries, and the constant threat of something terrible happening at a US venue due to a terrible presidency? Does that just not fill you with excitement? In all seriousness though, I am pretty excited about the upcoming World Cup from a couple different perspectives, but mostly from a footballing one, of course. Since the last World Cup, we've already seen a couple of tides change in international football, so it's going to be very fun to see how this all plays out on the biggest stage. And heck, even depending on when you're watching this, there's still so many countries that are yet to qualify, so there could even be some surprises as to who even makes the trip. So yes, plenty of actual reasons to get excited. And interestingly enough, we're also entering a new era of the World Cup since the format has been expanded. Gone is a format that we've become accustomed to over the last 7 iterations of our beloved competition spanning 28 years, and hello, making changes in the name of generating as much revenue as possible. Essentially now, instead of having 32 teams compete in 8 groups with the 2 best teams progressing into the knockouts, we're now going to have 48 teams compete in 12 groups with the top 2 still progressing, but now the 8 best 3rd place teams will now progress into the round of 32. It does sound a little bit confusing, but it's pretty straightforward. But that does increase the total number of games in the tournament from 64 to 104, but all still within a month time frame that we're accustomed to. I'll leave it up to your imaginations as to who really benefits from double the games in the same amount of time. But you know what, you could say that theoretically expanding the World Cup will allow for better stories as many countries will begin to make their World Cup debuts, and also this could allow for a fairy tale story to happen that will result in a brand new World Cup champion being crowned. And yeah, maybe, but it's that last part that I mentioned that I really kind of want to focus on. A brand new World Cup champion being crowned, as in a country that's never before won the World Cup. So think of a pool of countries that could potentially win the World Cup. First, some favorites that have already won the competition. Think of Argentina, France, Spain, Germany, outside shouts like Italy if they qualify, and then you have the countries that haven't won it before who have a decent chance or are considered maybe dark horses. You know, think Netherlands, Portugal, and maybe, you know, some random dark horse like Ecuador or something. But I'm here to tell you right now, there will not be a brand new country winning the 2026 World Cup. And you might think I'm crazy for saying this, or maybe I'm just stating the obvious here, but from a pure numbers perspective, I don't believe there's going to be a brand new country crowned as World Cup champions, and I'm here to break down why. And real quick boys, if you're enjoying the video, leave a like, comment, share, subscribe. We drop weekly football videos, so hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss an upload. And if you're not new to the channel boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video. Make sure you drop a comment. With that being said boys, let's get into the numbers of why no one knew is going to win the World Cup. Alright, so quick history lesson before we get into the numbers. So a lot of you obviously are going to know the World Cup's been around for a long time, but many of you probably don't know exactly how long. Guys, the World Cup has been around since 1930. This competition is 95 years old.
Damn! I'm sorry.
And there's some controversy as to the first 2 iterations of this tournament, but I do just want to touch on them to kind of lay some groundwork for the moving forward. The 1930 edition was at first meant to have 16 participants, but Japan and Siam withdrew, and Egypt missed the ship to the host country, Uruguay. But mainly the biggest talking point of the first ever World Cup was that it only had 4 participants from Europe, as many countries across the pond either couldn't or didn't want to make the long and costly trip, especially as they were feeling the effects of the Great Depression. Uruguay would go on to win the initial tournament, but this then set a precedent for the 1934 edition, which would be hosted in Italy. That year there would be 16 participants, but now the bulk of the teams would be from Europe, as South American countries now couldn't afford the travel, and Uruguay in an act of pettiness would boycott the tournament. So again, the World Cup felt lacking. Italy would end up winning the tournament, of course, with allegations of corrupt refereeing being thrown their way, par for the course when discussing pretty much anything Italian. Nonetheless, the competition would continue for years and years to come, with so many different storylines playing out, which more or less brings us to where we are today in terms of winners. So now do your best to follow along with me here, because realistically we're playing the numbers game, so I'm going to be throwing a lot of digits at you. In the 95 years that this tournament has been around, there have been 80 different countries that have participated in the competition. Out of those 80 countries, only 8 have actually won, meaning that there's already just a 10% success rate for countries in the World Cup going off that baseline. Adding more countries to the upcoming pool is only going to lower that success rate as well. In the 95 years since the inception of the competition, there has been 22 actual tournaments that have played out. So keeping in mind that only 8 countries have won the tournament, tournament, only 36% of the tournaments have actually seen a brand new winner being crowned. How are you doing? Are you following along, Will? Please just bear with me, a couple more numbers to go. So far, the last 7 versions of the tournament, there were 32 teams that had an opportunity to win, meaning with no other factors at play, it was already a 1 in 32 chance, so 3%. And going into 2026, the odds for a team to win are going to be even lower, since now it's 1 in 48, which is just 2%. So nations already had a statistically low percentage of winning the competition due to the sheer odds now being in their favor. But then we look at the long-term data, and it's still indicating that really, at best, their chance is anywhere from 10 to 36%, which really isn't much to write home about either. Add to that the fact that no debuting country has ever won the World Cup, if you exclude the first ever tournament, of course, and really all the new entries have no hope. Of course, the odds are dynamic because not everyone's coming into the competition on an even playing field. There are clearly going to be teams that are a lot better than others, but by just sheer numbers, things do not look good for a new winner or for new debutants as well. But okay, those are all cold hard numbers, right? I get it. What really matters is on the pitch, and also I guess behind the scenes what happens within the federations, but you get it. So I guess let's see within the last 2 decades or so, when there was a new World Cup winner, more or less how they got there, and also kind of how close other teams got. So with that, the most recent brand new winner of the World Cup was Spain in 2010. This team needs little to no introduction, but let's give them some of their flowers. A squad that consisted of many players that will realistically go down as all-timers started off their reign of terror by winning the 2008 Euro tournament. This side relished with a tiki-taka style of play that dominated world football in the late 2000s and early 2010s, and they translated their 2008 success to the 2010 World Cup. Spain would prove to be a side that was incredibly difficult to break down, and one that could hold the ball for the entire match if they really wanted to. When all was said and done, they would come out as World Cup champions, and they pretty much left zero room for question as they did so in such a dominant fashion, and then they proceeded to go on and win the Euros again in 2012. So yeah, the last team to add their first ever World Cup star just so happened to be a once in a generation team that dominated world football for half a decade through a revolutionary style of play, and a squad that consisted of multiple players who could be considered the best of their generation or potentially all time. No biggie, right? They made it look easy. But by the time the 2026 World Cup rolls around, it's gonna have been 16 years since then. And then before Spain won their first ever World Cup in 2010, the last time before that was when France won it in 1998, 12 years before Spain. In 1998, France would win their first ever World Cup thanks in large part to the big changes that were made behind the scenes. Essentially, France was going through a period where they wanted to phase out their older stars like Ginola and Eric Cantona that potentially had already given their all to the national team in order to usher in a new generation led by a certain Zinedine Zidane. And boy did this pay out. There was talent coming from everywhere in this France squad, and so many young and fresh players were ready to give their all for the national team and take them to the next level. You had names like Zidane, Trezeguet, Thierry Henry, Robert Pires, Patrick Vieira, Lilian Thuram, who were all aided by the veteran presences of Deschamps, Petit, and Marcel Desailly. So in the case of France, you had a national team that took a massive risk and shifted their ideology to cater towards, again, a once-in-a-generation list of players. Essentially, the last 2 times that we had brand new World Cup winners crowned, we had some occasions that were very rare in world football. On the one hand, you could say that since it's been 16 years since we've had a new winner, then maybe we're due for another one. But I'd counter that by saying how many teams that are going into this 2026 World Cup that haven't won already are either A, majorly shifting an incredibly young core into their national team setup, or B, is playing a once-in-a-generational style of football. I think you know what the answer to that is. So really, by dissecting that aspect of what goes into winning a World Cup, it's looking bleak for those teams that haven't won as well. And we had some close calls over the years, but really those didn't really pan out and didn't really have that many legs to run with. In 2006, the closest that a team would get would be Portugal. This Portugal side had a baby Ronaldo surrounded by a squad full of superstars. They had topped their group. They had beaten England and Netherlands in the knockout stages already. But when they went up against a team that already had a World Cup to their name in France in the semi-finals, they would get bested 1-0, and thus they would go another year without a brand new champion being crowned. In 2010, it was written in the stars for a team to get their first ever World Cup, as the final would consist of Spain and Netherlands. So that's a one where you could say, okay, we have a new winner. In 2014, we had Netherlands, perennial runners-up of this competition. They would come in with a very strong squad as they were building off that 2010 World Cup. They came into the tournament absolutely hot. They got their revenge on Spain. They ended that tiki-taka dominance while also topping the group perfectly. They would coast in the knockout rounds, but eventually lost to a team that already had a World Cup in Argentina. You could say that was karma for the Noera Penal. 2018, we would have two teams come close in Croatia and Belgium. Belgium had a golden generation led by Eden Hazard with many stars across the pitch, but really this will not pan out for them. A team that had been deemed underperformers given the squad that they had at their disposal would underperform once again. Croatia on the other hand would mop through this competition. Modric and Rakitic absolutely bossed all the midfields that they came up against, and overall they were an amazing team unit. They would top their group over Argentina and even beat them 3-0 in the group stage. They would knock out England in the semi-finals to make it to the final, so there was hope that maybe, just maybe, this Croatian team could pull off an upset, but then they would proceed to get murdered by France, allowing them to add their second title. In 2022, we had two surprises make the semi-final. Croatia against all odds will return to the penultimate round. Many had written them off because of the fact that it really looked like their squad was full of aging players, but Modric really rolled back the clock with this tournament. Croatia this year would close to pretty much the semi-final. In the process, they would upset a Brazilian team that was a little bit of a low point, but in the semis they would meet the eventual champions in Argentina and got cooked. The other side was Morocco. Morocco was a strong and balanced team with key players like Hakimi, Aguerd, and Bono, really a very solid defense. They had a few upsets as they topped their group, and they even beat Spain and Portugal en route to the semi-final, but they came up against France eventually and they just stood no chance, which meant it was another year of just teams who had already won the tournament before adding another star to their name. So you can see from a number standpoint, it's not looking good for these guys. I don't know if my math made the most sense, but to me it did, so really I don't think it's gonna happen. So yeah, we don't know what's gonna happen. The numbers don't look good, but hey, who knows? For all I know, Mexico's gonna win it.